Australia's first science fiction story was published in 1832. Briefly mentioned by Van Eycken in his 1984 book Australian Science Fiction, the fiction story Australia Advanced, or Dialogues for the Year 2032 by Mephistopheles the Younger, first published in the Sydney Gazette and New South Wales Advertiser in May 1832 across 5 issues, has caught the imagination of many students of history and the arts, and now science fiction studies. This is unfortunate, as the dialogue is quite staid and boring, and does nothing to add to the history of Australian science fiction, besides existing as linearly the first. I would dearly love to find an earlier and better example than this. However, for now, this is what we're stuck with, and so let's look at it further. In 2002, Margaret Healy says in her thesis on Australian colonial poetry that the story makes the assumption that Australia will follow the English model and have tenants working land out in the provinces for landlords who live in Sydney or travel abroad. In A Companion to Science Fiction, 2005, edited by David Seed, a chapter written by Van Eycken and Sean McMullen on Australian science fiction history goes into a little more detail about the story. Note that a typo lists it as 3032. They say it foresees the construction of 2 suspension bridges across Sydney Harbour, the extinction of indigenous timber, and the construction of the Lightning locomotive engine, which runs, or flies rather, at 60 miles per hour. Since then, more attention has been made to the story. In 2010, Graham Skinner refers to it in his thesis as, in some part, being influenced by a concert by musician Barnett LeVay at the time. In 2013, John Morley refers to it in his book The Native Born, the first white Australians, exploring some of the predictions listed in the dialogue and giving his opinions. The story is later followed up in 2019 by Lyman Tower Sargent on their exploration of utopian fiction as 3072, who adds, "The advances are mostly technological, although from our perspective even the technological changes seem quite limited. Speed of travel by ship is mentioned often. There is a suspension bridge between Dover and Calais. Relatively little social change. For example, Australia remains a colony and is supporting Britain in its war with China. Australia's population has grown significantly, but there is no mention of significant expansion beyond the east coast. The Aboriginal population has died out around Sydney, but still exists to the north. No doubt there are other references I haven't found yet. So, while this story is recognized by Van Eycken as science fiction, being set in the future and predicting future advances, it has been referenced in works about poetry, music, and utopian fiction. Rather than review it myself, as it has limited relevance to my thesis, I leave it to you, dear reader, to breathe new life with your comments into this almost 200-year-old story, for herewith are all 5 sections, taken from Trove, for your delectation.